Welcome back. The Thabo Mbeki Foundation, in partnership with the University of South Africa, is hosting the 14th annual Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture at Gallagher Convention Center in Midrand. This year's theme is the new International Scramble for Africa and the challenges of unity. For more on this, we now cross to SABC News reporter Khayelihle Khumalo, who's bringing us the full view on this particular lecture this year. Khayelihle, thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. I can't imagine that there isn't a jubilant, tense energy, given that this lecture is taking place on the eve of a very pivotal election, and of course with various other African heads of state reflecting on Africa Day across the continent, and of course President William Ruto just having returned from a pivotal visit to the US, where he met with Joe Biden, part of the scramble for Africa into that theme. What do you think we can expect from this lecture this evening?
Well, that's right, Oliver. It's such a very significant moment. And as you know, that South Africa as a democracy has proven to be a very firm, well-established democracy. And when you talk about Africa Day, it's a moment really to celebrate the diversity, the vibrancy that you have in the continent. So, but also reflecting on a number of issues that are still facing the continent, whether you're talking about peace and security, economic integration, but someone who's really quite well-versed with a variety of issues and really the expectations that we can really just foresee ahead of the lecture itself is Ambassador Makubela. So we said thank you so much indeed for your time. So lovely. We look at the theme. I mean, it's about the new scramble for Africa, and we look at also the pockets of conflicts that are still affecting Africa's progress. Ambassador, really just take us through to the importance of this theme, just from your reading, given your extensive insights of the continent.
You know, the theme actually is the new International Scramble for Africa and the challenge of unity. Now, this Scramble for Africa takes place within the context of the new emerging multipolarity and the challenge that we have in terms of being united as to how we approach this multipolar world is the unity of the African continent. We possess a lot of resources, and yet we are a poverty-stricken continent. A lot of poverty countries are found here. A lot of least developed countries are here, but well-resourced. And lately we've seen challenges of conflict, military takeover. So they are really changing and realignment of forces around the continent that I hope this theme, today's lecture, would provide some direction in terms of how do we manage that. And given the gravity of the main speaker, who's a representative of the Secretary General, quite au fait with conflict areas. And I think it would be very helpful to understand how do we overcome these conflicts and really build a united Africa.
Ambassador, looking at the journey for the past 61 years, you know, from the genesis of OAU to transition to the African Union, surely there are some milestones that you have seen. I mean, for example, you talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area, but also, unfortunately, there are still impediments affecting Africa's progress.
I think Africa has done very well in terms of the project for decolonization. A lot of countries are free within the continent. The only country that still remains is Western Sahara. But by and large, a lot of countries are free. But there are new challenges that came with the building of the African state, because the African state was built on weaknesses and built on vestiges of the colonial state. So now you're starting to see countries changing, realigning themselves, and dealing with issues of neocolonialism. Economic development is one of the critical issues. We've seen the integration economically. And the RECs, the regional economic blocs that are starting to emerge to foster integration of the continent, as reflected in the Constitutive Act of the African Union. These are some of the issues that we can look forward to, and we can look back with pride in terms of strides that we've made in the continent.
Ambassador, speaking about strides, we know that this lecture also happens on the eve of South Africa's general elections. We know we've seen tsunami of coups in so many countries in the continent, in West Africa, Central Africa. I suppose also it gives us an opportunity to reflect 30 years of democratization, but also making sure that we beef up some weaknesses that we might have encountered.
We really need to reflect in terms of the coups that we've seen. We must address the root causes of the coups. What caused these coups? Because if you look at the pattern in West Africa, they almost assume the same pattern. Having said that, we are having elections going on here. And one of the defining factors during this election, it's how South Africa has stood firm for the support of the Palestinians. And I think it's going to affect the elections in the United States, the issue of the Palestinians, how they respond to this. But South Africa has stood firm in terms of providing support and raising challenges that are there in the Middle East and in Palestine. And now we've seen Sunak has announced general elections on the 4th of July. The defining factor again is going to be this issue of the Palestinians. So there's a general galvanized international support and international solidarity on the question of the Palestinian state. A few countries have come up to recognize the state of Palestine. Fragmentation within the G7, because France is part of the G7, and France is likely to recognize that. Spain is part of the G7. Spain is recognizing the new emerging Palestinian state.
All right. Thank you so much indeed for that insight there, Ambassador Makhubela, really just taking us through to the expectations and really the significance of this lecture. With that, back to you in studio.
That was Khayelihle Khumalo, SABC News Reporter.